In here for today before the going on the farm assessment tour. And so we're in the stage of making the plan and writing the report. We're going to talk about these things. This is probably a ATP or a rehab professional role. I don't think that someone who's just, I say just an agriculture person, but somebody whose main line of work is the agriculture side of things, unless you really want to do this for a career, to dig in and write the recommendation report. But this is good for us all to think about, that this is the whole rest of the process. This is what's going to happen after your part of the observations. So this is what you were talking about, Colleen. And like I said before, we add the concept of frequency. I put daily chores up really high because it's happening so many times that we want to accommodate those frequently done tasks. So with Mary's apiary, there was a whole list of ideas that were shared with her to think about. We got estimated costs, frequency, longevity, how long is this gonna be useful? Sometimes the longevity is determined by when will the item wear out. Sometimes it's determined by when does the farmer want to retire. Sometimes it's determined just by maybe the farm is going to outgrow it and not need it anymore. And I just try to make my professional judgment on that based on my experience and conversations with the farmer. So once again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of, don't start at the drawing board and make your own assistive technology before you've done the research to find out if somebody else has done it, because almost everything has already been done. And the more we can use what's already been done, buy something off the shelf and adapt it, we can avoid wasting a lot of time and resources reinventing something. So the funding for assistive technology, this is going to affect how we write up this report. And a farmer, a lot of my farmers actually want to do it themselves. I might do an assessment, give them my ideas, and they say, we'll take it from here. And I don't hear from them again. I consider that a successful case. I've done for them what AgrAbility is meant to do. I've assessed the situation, given them my observations, and pulled it all together, and here's some alternatives that you have to work from. Like was said yesterday by Tess, AgrAbility doesn't have funding to pay for the assistive technology, but vocational rehabilitation does. Every state has a voc rehab program. The monies come from the federal government. Some of our clients might have an insurance or part of the VA, family funding. I'm going to talk about voc rehab because they're such an integral part of what we do as AgrAbility professionals. We're really partners with voc rehab, and their goal is to help a person with a disability either prepare for work, it can help with education and training, finding the job, or preserving a job that's in jeopardy. That's a trigger word, right, Mike? If there's a job in jeopardy, voc rehab wants to keep them from losing that job. And that's the case of our farmers, that they have a job that's in jeopardy. They need to do these tasks. The weather is changing, things need to be happening. And so voc rehab can help with that. The eligibility is based on the things that we've already talked about, medical conditions, functional limitations that are a barrier. And so then we work on doing the assessment, a plan for employment, helping the farmers have informed choice so they know what their options are, and then implementing the plan. Voc rehab can help purchase the assistive technology, and then we can provide follow-up services and make sure it's continuing to work. But we always have to remember that the client is the CEO, that we are serving them in the best way that we know to help them. Whether it's AT services or advocacy, sometimes it's just standing up for them. Brian was telling me a story at lunch about just a simple advocacy of getting accessible parking spots at the Michigan Park and Rides. Sometimes just a friendly phone call or being a squeaky wheel, changes can be made and we can advocate for our clients. And there is a due process for disagreement, whether it's with Voc Rehab or for us as professionals. We want our clients to feel that they have the freedom to question us and have their options open, and that we're going to receive that kindly and work with them in that. So Kim writes a lot of letters of medical necessity, and that would be more down the lines of maybe Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance companies that have to be convinced that this is an absolute medical necessity for the person to receive this assistive technology. A lot of times with the Voc Rehab cases, it's not as stringent as that, but still that's what we're doing. We are documenting that there is a medical necessity for this person to continue having their job, and so that's why they need this assistive technology. And so Kim has an example. If you want to come up and just talk about how you think through your letters of medical necessity.
Yeah, so, and a lot of what you're going to be doing, I'm not sure, would be described in maybe some of the detail that I'm required to go into, but one of the things that Ned was touching on that I think is really valuable to put in all letters of medical necessity are things like, what other options have you considered? And I don't have that at the top, but I really want to stress the importance of that. Any funding source wants to know that you've looked at things that might be cheaper and you've ruled them out. For obvious reasons, you're asking them to put out a lot of money. So I think that's really imperative. But one of the things that I do in my reports is a description that's a little more medical based. You can see I use a lot of diagnosis and their codes. I talk about pressure ulcers in here, because what I'm requesting in this letter of medical necessity, and you see at the top, and I don't think my vendor would care that I used him. I actually use a lot of ATPs, but they tend to be the specialized seating ATPs. So that's what he is and does, and we do this collaboratively. So I'm coming at it from a medical point of view, but completely relying on the ATP to help us determine the best equipment needs. That's so an ATP's niche. As a medical professional, that's our collaboration. You know, he might look at, you know, or you all might look at the therapist as, how can you help us know what medically is okay to do given that back injury? Well, I'm saying, yeah, what equipment's out there? So I talk about transfers, and I talk about some of the other things in there that are really important, which is patterns of movement observed. And that's something you all can do. Observation skills of movement, I think, doesn't necessarily have to be done by a therapist, but you can do that. When we were talking about observations before, just seeing patterns of movement when we refer back to Mary, almost every picture, I saw her doing what? Bending over. That bend over is so hard on the back. So observing that, during my farm visit, Mary was observed to bend at the waist with poor ergonomics 14 times. That's super valuable. That's one day. That might have been 2 hours, right? So, your observations, and I'm touching a little on that, but it goes to how you write your report, are so key, because that's the kind of data my funding source wants to know. And I'm sure yours does too, whoever it might be. Oh, okay. If I can find it. Oh, thank you. So we talk a little bit about the current system. Now for you, this is a current wheelchair system, but you might want to talk about what they're currently using or doing and why it's not working. So those are the 3 components, and you can see I touch on them. The current wheelchair and seating system is over 5 years old. So for me, most of my clients have Medicare and Medicaid. That's the requirement, is that your seating system has to be 5 years old before I can even request a new one. There's some flexibility in that if I'm only requesting seating and they've had physical changes, but that's a little bit different. I talk about what's broken. The tilt mechanism is broken. Why is that imperative? You already know he has a wound, an ulcer. I talked about that. So if you can't tilt back in your wheelchair and you're sitting in it for 12 hours a day because you have a job, you're so at risk. So I want to make sure I'm giving no outs. You know, I want to make sure that whoever's reading this feels like, oh, I have nowhere to go. I have to approve this. That's always my goal. So in the next section, and I'm not sure if this is something you do, but I have to break out every component. So I talk about the molded back and why it's necessary, and I use those words, and I think you should too. This isn't optional. We're not requesting optional equipment. We're saying this is medically necessary. If I don't do this to support Mary, she's going to keep doing her job, but she's going to injure her back more. Because it was clear Mary was not going to stop beekeeping, right? So we have to make sure that we're using that language to impress the imperativeness of this. And then just some other options that I include on mine. You know, the hip belt for safety, keeping them back in their chair. Any questions about some of this so far? Oh, sorry, I thought he was starting me. Oh, sure. So this individual has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. So one of the problems that happens when you have cerebral palsy, which is a type of brain injury, right? They had lack of oxygen to the brain that created deficit in their motor planning. So tone is really what's happening when your muscles are being overfired. So the brain is essentially keeps sending that signal to the muscle, contract, contract, and they can't inhibit that. Where normally we're only sending the message to contract when it's like for purpose, right? Like we're thinking I'm going to pick this up and lift up whatever I'm lifting. And their muscles are so overfiring that it creates a tone pattern. So a lot of times we'll list it as extensor tone, which means they're stuck in extension. If you've ever seen people who look like they're trying to pop out of their chair or pop out of their seat, and sometimes people have flexion tone, which is kind of where everything flexes up. They're a little more curled over, things are tight up against them. So those are the two different tonal patterns I pretty much reference. I will sometimes say mixed tone because there are people who have like extensor tone in their head and neck, but then flexion contractures in their extremities, and that can also be really common. So I talk about some of those things, and then I break down every component. So for you guys, when you're recommending equipment on the farm, you may have one piece of equipment, but it has several components to make work. For instance, with Mary, you know, Ned broke out the options of all the different things that we need to help support her. And then you kind of decide what's the priority and what can you not live without. And that's really key is, okay, we can ask for the moon, but in my world, it is what can this system not function without? And that's a good perspective to think about. All right, you sit here. Oh, was that it? Okay, any questions?
Okay, in my reports, I start out with 1 or 2 pages, pictures of the farm, describe the business, give the medical overview, quote medical documents, quote functional limitations from the physical therapist or the functional capacity assessment, list the barriers to employment that are caused by those conditions. So this is an example. It's not hugely detailed, but it needs to tell the story enough for the rehab counselor, the funding agency, to understand what is going on in this person's life. The 40 craft shows annually, that's big because we're going to be talking about that. And the 3 farmers markets per week, that's a lot of loading up and going. Anybody here ever done the farmer market scene? That's a lot of lifting and carrying and filling your vehicle and unloading and sorting and selling. Very, very extensive. Mention her work with the other beekeeper and the other supports in her life, the people working with her, other people's abilities around the farm. Talk about traveling down south during the winters, splitting hives, and down at the bottom, I mentioned her relationship with Greg, being able to borrow heavy equipment from him and do lots of things that wouldn't be economically viable for her 240 hives, but since she's worked with him, she has access to that other equipment. So here's more pictures of her working and selling her honey. And I try to make my reports look nice. And I don't know how much it matters. I think the rehab counselors appreciate it, and people who aren't familiar with the agriculture scene, they can't quite picture what's happening. And so I think pictures tell a lot of words. So then this is the health overview, the situation with her injury and the vertebrae not healing correctly, the surgeries that didn't work, the physical capacity assessment that says don't lift over 20 pounds. How heavy did I say the honey crates were? 55 pounds. Yeah, she's approved for 20. Not supposed to squat, crawl, kneel, or climb. She can occasionally, this is the terminology in the physical capacity assessment, that she can occasionally walk, bend, stoop, climb stairs, pull and push. So we did have a conversation about her climbing, because one part of the report said no climbing, another place said stairs occasionally. So I had to be careful wordsmithing. That when I was recommending a way for her to get onto the back of her pickup truck, I didn't say for her to climb on. It wasn't a ladder. We were adding stairs because stairs are okay. And it was inclined. It wasn't a straight up ladder. It was kind of inclined stairs, handrail. I was questioned on that. I explained it the way I just said it to you, and it was approved. So our words matter. So those limitations cause barriers to employment. That's key language. The limitations are causing a barrier to the employment. And so these are the specific things, the activities on the farm. Carrying the honey to the venues, kneeling to split hives, lifting honey supers when extracting, carrying honey to the storage garage, carrying honey to the packing and labeling room, lifting hives for inspections, treatments, and honey harvest. So those are the necessary activities that are prevented because of her physical limitations, which go back to the diagnosis. So we're keeping this constant chain of information. All sorts of functional limitations that could happen on a farm in the specific recommendations page. So I just went through the overview, the farm tasks overview, the medical overview. Now we move into the section of the report where I'm talking about a specific recommendation page. And in the specific recommendation page, there are these three sections, okay? We talk about the barrier to employment in more detail. We listed it in the overview. Now we're going to talk about it in detail. Then we're going to give a description of the different AT options. That's what Kim was talking about. We need to talk about the AT options that aren't good, but we need to talk about them so that the funding agency knows we thought about it. If you don't talk about it, they're going to ask you, and you're going to have to talk about it anyway. So put it in the report. If that sheet of plywood would work, say a sheet of plywood would work for a while, but long term it needs to be something different. Say we talked about a bed slide, but it decreased the capacity, she still needed to lift. So that leaves it, the only good option is this trailer. And that's where we come to the recommendation. So we've described the barrier to employment in detail. We've talked about the different assistive technology options, and we're starting to arrive at a conclusion. Now in the recommendation, we say these dimensions of a trailer with this kind of a tailgate ramp from this vendor, and here's the price. And here's two other vendors with prices that are higher. And so we're getting right down to the nitty gritty of what is exactly being requested. So the barrier to employment section, these are just good points that you could make as you're writing out your barrier to employment. You can talk about the danger, because sometimes there's an item that's not used very often, but if you don't have it, the consequences could be extremely severe. I use this quite often with cattle handling systems for smaller farms, that you would normally say you don't need a $14,000 cattle handling system for 25 cows. Except if you can't walk very fast and you might trip, and there's a very high likelihood you're going to be injured worse. And so that elevates the importance, and we start talking about why this is a serious barrier to employment because of that safety issue. Talk about why it's essential for that person to do the task instead of trading it to someone else. And so there's a whole list here. I use this. I have this list set beside me while I'm writing. I look at it and think, okay, yeah, this is why this person needs to do it specifically. So you're going to have access to these PowerPoints, and if you want to just print this out and have it set by your desk when you're writing your barriers to employment, it's good to just have these reminders. The last one can be tricky, talking about the cost of accommodation and is it reasonable for the ability that's gained. And I suppose that's up to our professional judgment. We could spend $1 million and accomplish a lot, but no, what do you do, Kim?
And it's open to interpretation wherever you apply it. So it's your job to make the case for, sure, but it's not. So it's truly your words that you pick, the equipment that you pick, and their diagnosis, and just kind of tying those pieces together.
I will use this terminology to say, even though this item is not used frequently, the safety hazard is so extreme that this cost is reasonable for the safe ability to work cattle. You had a comment? Okay. Okay. So you described yourself and your experience in this. Okay. So instead of me at the end of my reports saying, if you have any questions, call Ned Stoller and here's his number, to put a paragraph that says, I've been doing assessments for this many years and I've had experience in these types of agriculture and I'm confident that these are the best recommendations. Okay, sure. We gained consensus with the rehab counselor, the occupational therapist, the farmer, and their family, and come to these. I'm confident these conclusions are so. Okay, good advice. Thank you, Sam. Yes, 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 yes. I only need to get in this a few times a year, and is it really worth that many dollars? And you know what? That conversation was valuable because I agreed with him. It wasn't worth $16,000 to get on the combine 5 times a year. So we researched another type of assistive technology, a lift that could do multiple things around the farm shop and buildings and maintenance, but would also work to get him on the combine. And that was the assistive technology we ended up recommending for him. It had multiple uses. I think I talked about that. Okay, these are just more good points to think about, the environmental conditions and how those are being accommodated by the assistive technology. Talking about medications, improvement in the medical condition. So this is what I wrote up for the barrier to employment here. That she needs to do this to sell her honey. They're 55 pounds. It's beyond what she's approved to lift in her physical capacities assessment from this date. So now in the assistive technology description, this is where my outcome measures go. This is basically what this assistive technology is going to accomplish. That she'll be able to lift and move and get her honey to where it needs to be without injuring her back. And I will also talk about the different options. So here, the assistive technology that I landed on was this transport trailer with the ramp. The ethics question, is this just an expansion of her farm or is this assistive technology? And I concluded here that because she was getting by fine, her minivan was working if she had not had this injury to her back, that the need for the trailer was assistive technology, even though it was great for her business. And she would have wanted it anyway. But in this instance, it was required. And so I recommended it as assistive technology. And the end result is that she'll be able to safely load and transport honey by July. This is a continuation. Yes, Ben? Yeah. It it helps to give a deadline, a goal to get there and accomplish this. And especially with agriculture, when something's needed by a certain time. Mine, and it's when it's the reality for the farm business. But yeah, yes, there can be further discussion. And that's where we would want to gain consensus and have those discussions before the report's written. We try to have the rehab counselor from the funding agency and myself and the farmer together and think through and have those discussions beforehand. And that would be considered assistive technology. That would be changing the method where she would only be lifting 20 pounds at a time. In her instance, it would be so many containers and just the time and restructuring, getting the different size of baskets instead. But that could be a viable. I I don't want to call it pushback, but conversation, just thinking of all the angles of it.
Change this regular, times that do.
Right. So what impact does making smaller packages have on the rest of the system? We might get into that sometimes, Jared, if we would recommend changing from a square bale system to a round bale system. where someone is able to handle their hay with mechanical means, much easier, but then they have to have a way to store it, a place to store the hay. You can't get up in the hay mow anymore, and so one thing leads to another, and you have to carry it all the way to the end and figure out what's the new system going to be. You got another comment or question?
Partners, are they more like you if you say that this is on severe pain to bend over 13 times in 2 hours versus saying if this person continues to bend over 13 times in 2 hours, it's going to deteriorate the function or the structure of the spine itself and cause further loss.
I try to use what is in the medical documentation. So I think that the pain is a valid reason if the doctors or the OTs or whoever is saying it, then I will use their language.
Just to speak a little bit to pain. Pain is something that is subjective and management. So I tend to stay away from pain. I might mention it, that they've been unable to tolerate something due to pain. But because then they're going to say, well, pain's your limiting factor, then our affirmative pain management can come back and tell them how. So that's the sticky, tricky with pain. It is always, almost always a factor when somebody's got to make their or as well.
You're saying to get the medical recommendation from them, or you also notes that?
Quite often, vocational rehabilitation will provide me with that, but also the client will also at times get the medical records that I need. Debbie?
Yeah.
Jared?
So for someone who has been a I notice this, you need them to get medical meaning for that application where you can do some of these tasks.
Especially if it's going to be looking for funding, it's required. There needs to be a doctor's report. And Michigan Rehab Services has a form that the doctors can fill out that goes through and answers those questions. It's a couple pages, and usually I ask the farmer to take it with them to an appointment and just get it done. Ben? I haven't experienced that because farmers that are self-employed don't have workers' compensation insurance. If you had an employee that needed to have that, I think it would only become workers' compensation if it happened on the job. So this is the third paragraph of the assistive technology description. And I calculated it. If she could have this, it would decrease amount of lifting by 89%. I don't remember how I calculated it, but I did. I had numbers and I put it together. So I try to use numbers if I can, quantifiable. So when we get to the recommendation now, we're getting real specific. Make, model, part number, we already talked about this. The delivery cost, installation cost, fabrication or modification, repairs, warranty, all the details. This is Mary's 6x12 enclosed trailer, 72 inches high so she can stand up. It's low profile, it's closer to the ground so the tailgate ramp isn't too steep. She can use her carts and dollies to roll racks on and off. And here's the vendor, here's their state of Michigan number, and if I have that, Not all of the vendors are signed up yet with the state, and then the voc rehab counselor and their helpers work on that. Assistive technology suppliers, we've already talked about this, but they are such a valuable part of this process. Critical to have them involved in this conversation, because from their experience, they might know what can be fabricated, and they might have some good ideas how to do something different than we had thought about, because they know what they can do and different attributes of their technology. So definitely include them. It's so important for us is to treat the suppliers right, so that when we are seeking quotes, that they're comparing apples to apples and we're not favoring one supplier over another, but they all know the same attributes that need to be included and what they're getting into if they have to do the delivery or installation, or if the farmer's going to do that part themselves. And if they are a reputable vendor. And then the last part is in the recommendation report is follow up. And that's usually an ATP going back out after a certain amount of time. The ATP will be involved in making sure that the ordering and delivering is happening, that what's delivered is what was ordered, and that it meets the outcome measures, so that the state knows that they are paying for the correct thing. That's another role of the ATP, sort of accountability on the back end as things are provided. So that's all in the report. Now we move into implementing the plan. Praise God, it's been authorized, it's approved by the state or the funder, whoever it is. Now the work starts with the ATP, once again, coordinating letting the vendors know that they've been selected, and once again, those who weren't selected, if we had to get multiple price quotes, to let them know. Thank them for their time and trouble, but just so they're not hanging out there waiting. And then letting the farmer know that the assistive technology is coming, help the farmer and the supplier connect, so we don't end up being like a triangle where I'm trying to coordinate between a farmer and a supplier and I don't know either one of their schedules. There's better use of our time than that. So to have them work out the details of that, and then the job site monitoring to make sure that it's set up correctly and doing what it needs to do. The training, which I talked about earlier, that the farmer and the people on the farm know how to use it well. Following up with the suppliers if there's a problem. Also, what to do if the client refuses a delivery. And that gets complicated and takes a lot of our time, but it is a role for us to play as an ATP. Karen mentioned it earlier that here comes the lift. Oh man, now the farmer sees it. I don't want a seat. I can still stand. Why am I sitting down to get on my tractor? Now we have to work back through, but that is a role for us to play. So here's Mary pointing out her trailer and how she's adapting it, making it so that she can tie down the racks that roll in and shelving that she and her grandpa are putting into the trailer. And I provide a follow-up report to the state saying it's been delivered, it's working, it's what it was supposed to be, here's how she's using it, and that the outcome measures are met. So sometimes if we go out to do the follow-up and it's not working, we want to be done, but are the outcome measures being met is the bottom line. If the outcome measures are not being met, we really want to be done, but we have to remember who we're serving. We put so much time and effort into it, we can become frustrated or impatient. We wish it was done, but it needs to be providing for the client. Otherwise, we didn't do the purpose of the whole thing. So you've noticed in that service delivery cycle, there's arrows that go back up. From follow-up, we might need to go back up and revisit the goals, or if it's not doing what it needs to do, what do we do instead? Especially if we find that the AT is refused or broken or abandoned, we need to figure that out. Our job's not done until it's in use. So Here's what happened with Mary. We recommended a whole bunch of assistive technology. It was delivered. It worked great. In the meantime, she had a new specialist that looked at her situation and said, the only way to fix this is a major reconstruction surgery. And you're going to need to be down for a year to recover. Down for a year. But after that, you're recovered. Your physical limitations are going to be the same as they are now, but you'll be able to keep working. It's just going to be under these set of circumstances. So that told us we can start making long-term plans for the assistive technology. Even though there's a time when she's going to have this major surgery, it sort of entered us into a new phase with her. We had been focused on just selling the honey, processing the honey, and light duty tasks. But now that we sort of had some stable prognosis from the medical professionals that after this reconstruction surgery, her limitations would be the same, the rehab counselor was ready to move forward, that it would be worth purchasing assistive technology for the heavier duty tasks in the aviary. And it also told us that she's not going to be able to return to work with the large beekeeping, the 5,000 hive guy. She's not going to be able to have access to his equipment anymore. And so, for assistive technology, for her to be able to manage her 240 hives, she had to have more equipment. She had already started accommodating herself. She got her own camper so that she would have her own place to stay when she went south to work with her hives. She was engaged. It was clear that she is moving forward with this. And so that was also an encouragement to Voc Rehab to come alongside also with additional assistive technology. So we just had to we basically did another assessment of the heavy duty tasks that needed to be done and started the process again. At the point when maybe we thought it was done, we started again with new tasks, new technologies. Okay, Greg is no longer in the picture for his equipment, and so the case is continuing to move forward. Yes.
So if she would not be able to work her hives for a year, state of Indiana, and in that first year, they don't use a piece of equipment or it's no longer used at the end of a year, they take it back. So how did that fall in with the vocational rehab and her having set out a year?
So that
a year before she had the surgery?
That would be the cultural context to work with, because your government, your regulations in your state had a policy that would say if you don't use the technology for a year, we're going to take it back. In Michigan, that's not the case. And understanding the timeline and the processes and the Michigan policy, it was appropriate to go ahead and move forward. In Indiana, maybe we would have said, okay, we got to wait a year. So we just have to include all of that. So the follow along is the longer term, checking back in maybe after a year. And in my experience, this is somewhat informal. If I'm passing through an area going close to a client, I'll just give them a call and stop in, see how things are going, and help keep track. Or Bev will go out. Somebody from AgrAbility will send an annual survey and just try to stay in touch with our clients for the long term. And there have been people that we work with, and 11 years later, we get another call. And we can continue the process then. Always looking at the outcome measures and are they being met, and is a new assessment needed? So these arrows going back up to the top, it might seem like spaghetti, it might be circular, it might be that we don't get everything exactly right. We don't spend as much time as we wish we could because we have so many clients to work with. But this that's been described is the ideal goal for us to work towards. And probably when we go out to the farm and do the assessment tour now, you're gonna watch what I do and say, and you're gonna evaluate me and say, he said we're supposed to ask this and he didn't. And so I would like that, really, if you can grade me and take notes. I have sort of a quick note sheet that I take with me when I do an assessment, because if I have my full 17-page, it's too hard to be flipping all over the place, finding the right spot in the assessment tool to make my notes. And so I have one side is sort of the farm overview, the medical overview notes, the demographic information, address, phone number, and all that. The other side is sort of the large primary goals and it's just out of the worksite assessment tool. So it's mobility, livestock, machinery, maintenance and repairs, and farm management. So as we're doing the interview and the assessment walk observations around the farm, I can just jump to those 5 categories and scribble my notes madly while we're going. It just turns into a practicality, real life thing. So I'm going to hand these out when we go to the farm here in a few minutes. I would like it if everybody used this, take your notes, write down your observations. I'm going to do the interview with the farmer since it'll be hard for 40 of us to ask questions in the interview part. But I think I do want you to think of this as though you're doing it and make your notes. And tomorrow I would like to compare notes of things that we observed, and maybe we'll look on the toolbox and see if we can find some ideas that we would share with her and have some of that discussion. And if you want to take the notes and observations that you have from the farm this afternoon, and you want to try to write up some sample recommendations that has the barriers to employment, the assistive technology description, and then your recommendation, and you want to send that to me to look at and have me give comment, I'd be willing to do that. It's not going to be like an official part of this training, but if you want to practice that way and just get my feedback, be okay. So will you hand these out?
One quick question back to your follow-on.
Yeah.
Is it after the follow-on, a whole year later, that you actually consider the case closed? And then if they come back in 3 or 6 or 10 years, then you're opening a new, even though you know that one?
I don't delineate it that way. It probably just depends on your organization. We don't have a hard and fast rule that we have to close a case, but in a reality, like just in a, this is what happens, basically a case is closed after 6 months to a year. So the paper that's being handed out now, keep it with you for the farm assessment. You have a question or comment? Yes.
Is this?
The worksite assessment tool, this book, is basically the information gathering part, and then the goals and outcome measures. It does not really flow into some standard report output. But I will email if you would like a sample report and a sample, like my case notes and this Excel spreadsheet I use. I can share that with you. About the only difference in my Excel spreadsheet compared to the assessment tool is I have a few more specific questions for the caregiver. And I think I added in some more specific notes for the fruits and vegetables because there's so much of that in Michigan. Yes, Christian.
It's of the how it gets rolled out.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes you as the ATP needs to sit with it and know that maybe they took the recommendations and they're going according to plan, or maybe they did not. It's not at all anywhere on the spectrum. Can you talk about that a little bit more? I'm confused about when as an ATP you will be done with your job, or when as an ATP you will be satisfied with the outcomes. How to balance that?
The question was, the farmer, the client is the CEO. They get to make the executive final decision if they're going to receive assistive technology or not. And our role as ATPs is gathering all the information, making good recommendations, bringing all the parties together, having good dialogue, making good recommendations. But if the farmer doesn't receive it, he may or may not receive what we have done. And how do I come to a place where I feel satisfied that I've done my job, whether or not it's received? And I think that when maybe my work is not received, this becomes all the more important to go back and look at the details. And are there places in the checklist I didn't gather necessary information? Did I miss something about the social context or maybe the mental health or whatever the situation would be? Double check that. Probably have a conversation with Bev, who is a very good, just agriculture perspective. She knows everybody in Michigan in agriculture, and they all know her. And I think get some feedback from other people. And if we feel like we've done our due diligence, and that's still the decision they made, then that's what it is. And we'll let it be. And maybe at some point in the future, there will be a different call. But I think that's how I come to feel like I've done what I can do. I'm not God. We all do our best and ask for his mercy and just try to love people. So tough question, but a good one. Okay, I think that's it for this room, and I'm not sure what the timeline is for the farm visit, but I'll turn it over to you.